Okay, hello there everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrow back with the news and views from the Nefarium on Thursday, June 13th, 2013. We are in the year beyond Thunderdome, and what a year it's shaping up to be. I'll get to the news and views in just a second, but first a little announcement. I've heard from George Ann Hughes, and I want everybody to keep her in your prayers and especially donations, because her eyes are not responding well to the surgery. She has to have another surgery on both eyes. She hasn't the money to do this, but she does have to go to the eye doctor without fail this coming Monday. So please think of her in your prayers and your donations. She's been a stalwart, a trooper in this alternative media community, and given very generously of her time and also of her own money to help upload shows and maintain bandwidths. Please help her out. This last week I was on an extended kind of business trip, and I'll talk more about that when I'm able. It involves some television filming, and I did this with a colleague and friend of mine, and I'll let you know my impressions eventually of television. So anyway, but on the way I kept in touch with my email, and a lot of you were asking for commentary on this emerging scandal, I guess it is, pardon me, in the United States concerning all of the government snooping. There was first the IRS that was apparently involved in some targeting of politically right or conservative groups in this country, which is of course a big no-no, and quite frankly, it's not the first time I recall this charge being leveled. It's not just the Obama administration. I think other administrations have done this too, but it's certainly raised everyone's eyebrow. And now we have Ed Snowden releasing documents from the NSA. And a lot of you wanted me to comment on this. And I want to kind of set the context for my comments by pointing out two things that I believe are lurking in the background here. I haven't had a lot of time to study everything that everybody's been sending me, so I'm going on first impressions here, but these impressions were formed while I was on the road and checking my emails and kind of trying to follow the story, as it were, during the past week. And the first context I want everyone to bear in mind is the context that I wrote about in Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations, that there is, first of all, a hidden system of finance, a very fraudulent one, that's been in existence since the end of World War II, that was created by the American national security establishment as a kind of a completely off-the-books slush fund for covert operations and also for the funding of black projects research. All right, that's the first context that I want everyone to bear in mind as you listen to this news and views from the Nefarium. The second context that I want everyone to bear in mind is I've been blogging a great deal on the website about the emergence of the so-called BRICS, as I like to call them, the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And I have raised the issue that with all of the covert operations that have been sponsored by the West on the peripheral states of the former Soviet Union, Belarus, the Ukraine, the Transcaucasus region, and then on into the former Soviet republics in Central Asia, that eventually, and incidentally, it's worthwhile to recall that the United States gave then Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev solemn assurances that NATO would not be expanded into Eastern Europe, nor would an attempt to be made to expand Western influence on those or in those peripheral republics around the Russian Socialist Federated Republic, or Russia proper. And of course, this has not been the case. The West has sponsored the color revolutions in the Ukraine. It has sponsored covert operations in all of these former Soviet republics. And I have been suggesting that the United States could not continue to do this without expecting a very gradual and continual stepped-up response on the part of Russia, and that those responses would include covert operations inside North America on the part of Russia. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit later, if I remember to do so, in this News and Views about the form that such covert operations, I believe, might take, all right? But in that context, I also want you to recall that RT, Russia Today television and blog site, has become increasingly popular in the West because it is sponsoring stories that play to the growing discontent of populations within the West against their own governments and what those populations perceive to be the out-of-control corruption and influence of the financial oligarchs over their own governments, all right? And this is certainly true in the United States as it is in Western Europe. Now, with those two contexts in mind, let me get to the news and views on Ed Snowden and his leaking of documents from the NSA. And I'm going to reference two articles here. One is a very interesting and, in my opinion, compelling take on the Snowden affair by John Rappaport, who is an American author, researcher, and blogger, quite well known to some of you on his website, No More Fake News, all right? And this article is entitled, "Did Someone Help Ed Snowden Punch a Hole in the USA?" The second article I want to bring to your attention is actually a blog or an article on RT's website, and we'll get to that in a moment. But first, let me start with Rappaport and his take on Snowden. And let me read from his article, quote, "How many people work in classified jobs for the NSA? And here is one man, Snowden, who's working for Booz-Allen, an outside contractor, but is assigned to NSA. And he can get access to and copy documents that expose the spying collaboration between the NSA and the biggest tech companies in the world, and he can get away with it. If so, then NSA is a sieve leaking out of all holes, because that means a whole lot of other hired NSA employees can likewise steal documents. If the NSA is not a sieve, it's quite correct to suspect Snowden, a relatively low-level man, was guided and helped." And this was my very own first conclusion about Snowden and his connection to Booz-Allen. So I think that Rappaport is on to something there. In other words, he's a plant, and this whole thing may be an operation of some sort to cast a pall of suspicion over the espionage activities of the National Security Agency. Now, Rappaport goes on to point out a novel written by a gentleman by the name of Brad Thor. And in the novel, Thor posits the existence of a monster corporation, as Rappaport called it, called ATS. And on pages 117 and 118 of Thor's novel, Rappaport says the following, quote, "Thor makes a stunning inference that, on reflection, is as obvious as the fingers on your hand." Quote, "For years, ATS," that's the fictitious corporation, and Rappaport then inserts a parenthetical comment, "substitute NSA," had been using its technological superiority to conduct massive insider trading. Since the early 1980s, the company had spied on anyone and everyone in the financial world. They listened in on phone calls, intercepted faxes, and evolved right along with the technology, hacking internal computer networks and email accounts. They created mountains of black dollars for themselves, which they washed through various programs they were running under secret contract, far from the prying eyes of financial regulators. Those black dollars were invested into hard assets around the world as well as in the stock market through sham offshore corporations, shades of Martin Bormann. They also funneled the money into reams of promising R&D projects, which eventually would be turned around and sold to the Pentagon or the CIA. In short, ATS had created its own license to print money and had assured itself a place beyond examination or reproach, unquote. Now, Rappaport goes on to comment, quote, total surveillance has unlimited payoffs when it targets financial markets and the people who have intimate knowledge of them. Quote, total security awareness programs of surveillance are ideal spying ops in the financial arena designed to grab millions of bits of inside information and then utilize them to make investments and suck up billions or trillions of dollars, unquote. Now, you'll recall, and I have to agree with Rappaport here, I tend to think that this is at least one aspect of this NSA affair that has yet to come out. And it will be interesting to see, if it does come out, how it will be played in the lamestream media. Because you recall that one of the conclusions I reached in Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations precisely about this hidden system of finance and its coupling to the emerging technologies of data management and data mining that were exemplified by the emergence of software programs like Promise in the 1980s under the Inslaw scandal under the Reagan administration, that the implication was that the central banks now had major competition in the form of the intelligence agencies. Now, we don't want to make too much of that, because the case can also be made that the creation of the post-war intelligence agencies was itself an operation, or that they are the creatures of these central banks. But the fact of the matter is, I do think you have to distinguish the two, because the technological capability that these intelligence agencies, and particularly the NSA, would have vis-a-vis the central banks are astounding, and they can be used precisely as Thor, who is quoted in Rappaport's article, points out, can be used as a means of creating yet more money to fund black ops, and notably, Thor points out, research and development projects. So in other words, I think this war on terror, while portions of it may be legitimate, and while I certainly think governments do have the obligation to their people to conduct intelligence operations in order to protect their nations and so on, I certainly don't think that this includes spying on their own populations, and certainly don't think that it means the use of these technologies to create ever more leveraged mountains of hidden systems of finance out of the scrutiny of the public agencies of government or instruments of government, and certainly not use it for the vast expansion of military power. Now, this brings me to the second article, and this one appeared in RT. And the article reveals entirely what is going on here and may be going on behind the scenes. It says, Russia ready to consider asylum for NSA whistleblower Snowden. And that says it all right there. That Russia would consider offering asylum is an indicator that even if this did not begin as a covert operation of Russian intelligence or anyone else's intelligence, that they are now willing to exploit the public scandals occurring in the West for their own geopolitical agendas. And as I predicted, we're going to see more and more, I believe, of this kind of behavior of the BRICS nations, and perhaps even other nations that are getting increasingly fed up with the growing corruption and unipolarity of the Western worldview with America at its core. I think we're going to see a lot more of this, as a matter of fact. Now, Rappaport, incidentally, it should be pointed out, views the Snowden affair as perhaps being the operation of interagency rivalry, that perhaps Snowden was actually being used by the CIA to cast aspersions on the rival agency, the NSA. That may be plausible, that may be one way of looking at it, but I think we also have to entertain the possibility that perhaps the ultimate controllers behind these types of scandals and machinations may not lie within the West at all. But we're going to see more and more of this. And I think it's interesting that Russia's doing this rather than China. I think Russia is going to be the point man now for these types of BRICS covert operations, and we're going to see a lot more of it. And that's going to be very interesting to see how they play into the growing discontent within the Western populations. Anyway, that's it for my news and views this week, June 13th, 2013, and we'll see you next week, everybody. An additional announcement, everybody, we do have a members vid chat tomorrow night, Friday night, June 14th at 8 p.m. Central Time. So God bless everybody, and I'll see you on the flip side.